I don't think anyone wakes up one morning expecting their entire life to tilt on its axis. But looking back, maybe I should have seen the cracks forming long before everything shattered. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the sting of that November air on my face. It's the kind that cuts through your jacket and leaves you wondering why you ever thought a simple hoodie would be enough. It was November 14th, 2019, to be exact the day I can pinpoint as the beginning of the unraveling. But to really understand how it got there, you have to know what life looked like before the storm rolled in. My name is Daniel Moore. I grew up in a small town called Hartwell, Pennsylvania, place most people speed through on their way to somewhere bigger, somewhere louder. Hartwell is the kind of town where the same family has owned the diner since 1962. Where kids still gather in the Walmart parking lot on Friday nights because there's nowhere else to go, and where gossip spreads faster than wildfire. You can't sneeze in that town without half the county knowing by dinner time. I met Sarah Mitchell in the spring of 2012. Back when I was 23 and fresh out of a string of dead-end jobs that barely kept me afloat, Sarah was everything I wasn't at the time: polished, ambitious, with this sharp wit that could both charm you and cut you down in the same breath. She had moved to Hartwell from Pittsburgh after her dad passed away, helping her mom run the family-owned bookstore on Main Street. I used to wander in there just to kill time, pretending to look at the shelves. But really, I just wanted to hear her talk. She had that kind of presence, you know? The kind that made you feel like you were standing in the warmest spot in the room when she was near. We started dating that summer. By 2015, we were married in the Methodist Church on Oak Street. A modest but heartfelt ceremony with mason jar centerpieces and a friend's band playing cover songs at the reception. I remember my mom crying during our first dance, and my dad, who was always a man of few words, pulling me aside just to say, "She's a good one. Don't mess it up." For years, I believed that. I clung to it. Our life together wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I was working at a manufacturing plant just outside of town, 12-hour shifts. Grueling but steady on, Sarah kept busy managing the bookstore with her mom. We bought a little 2-story house on Birch Lane in 2016, the kind with creaky stairs and wallpaper in the kitchen that hadn't been updated since the early 90s. We spent weekends painting rooms, arguing over whether to adopt a cat or a dog, and driving to Pittsburgh every once in a while just to feel like we hadn't completely lost touch. With city life, if you asked anyone in Hartwell, they'd tell you we were one of the good couples. People would see us at the grocery store, smiling as we loaded milk and eggs into the cart, and they'd nod approvingly. We had become part of the fabric of that small town, woven into the picture of what settled down looked like. But here's the thing about small towns: they're suffocating if you look too closely. Everyone knows your business, and sometimes the way people look at you feels less like kindness and more like surveillance. For the longest time I ignored it, chalking it up to just part of life. But Sarah never quite got used to it. She'd roll her eyes at the old ladies who lingered too long at the farmer's market, whispering behind cupped hands. She wanted more than Hartwell, more than a quiet life in a 2-story house. More than what I could give her. I should have noticed the change sooner. In early 2019, Sarah started spending more time at the bookstore, even after hours. She'd say she was staying late to handle inventory or manage the new online orders they were trying to push. It made sense at first. The bookstore had been struggling, like most independent shops fighting against Amazon, but then the excuses grew more frequent, more rehearsed. I'd come home to an empty house, leftovers in the fridge, and a note on the counter that said, "Don't wait up." It's funny how easily you convince yourself not to notice things. The perfume I didn't recognize lingering on her clothes, it's the late-night text notifications she'd flip her phone over to hide, the way she suddenly started dressing up more on weekdays. I'd tell myself I was overthinking, that I was paranoid, that the long hours at the plant were making me insecure. And every time I tried to bring it up, Sarah would laugh it off, telling me I was overreacting, that I was making something out of nothing. Overreacting. That word lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. I remember one night in October 2019, we were sitting in the living room, the faint glow of the TV casting shadows on her face. I had asked if she wanted to go see a Steelers game with me that weekend, Something we used to do all the time, man, she brushed me off with this distant look in her eyes. She said she was busy with the store, that she couldn't just drop everything for football. I nodded, trying to swallow the disappointment. But deep down, it felt like something inside us had already shifted. And then came that night in November. The one that keeps me up even now. It was a Thursday, bitterly cold. The kind of night where the air feels sharp in your lungs. I had finished a double shift at the plant and was driving home, exhausted, and craving nothing more than a hot shower and sleep. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Sarah's car wasn't there. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was probably at her mom's or still at the bookstore, but then, out of habit, I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing. Something gnawed at me. Something I couldn't shake. So instead of going inside, I turned the car back on and drove down Main Street. The bookstore lights were off. The place was dark. Empty. That's when I saw her car parked a block down, outside of Malone's Tavern. My stomach dropped. Malone's was the kind of place we rarely went to. It wasn't exactly our scene sticky floors, neon lights, and a jukebox that still had cassette options. I parked a few spaces away and sat there for a moment, my breath fogging the windshield. My hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I don't know what I expected to see, but I couldn't just drive away. Through the window, I spotted Sarah. She wasn't with her mom. She wasn't going over inventory. She was sitting in a booth with someone I didn't recognize, leaning in close, laughing in a way she hadn't laughed with me in months. His hand brushed hers across the table, and I swear I felt the air leave my lungs. I didn't go inside that night. I just sat there, watching from the car like some pathetic cliche in a country song. And when I finally drove home, the word overreacting echoed in my head like a cruel joke. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't just a private betrayal. In a town like Hartwell, secrets don't stay secret for long. And soon enough, it wouldn't just be me who knew. It would be everyone. The night I saw Sarah in Malone's Tavern with that man was the night my world started to crack. But the real breaking point didn't come until weeks later. Sometimes betrayal doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water finding its way through the tiniest fractures until, before you realize it, the whole damn wall caves in. For the next few days, I told myself to wait, to breathe, to not jump to conclusions. I rehearsed conversations in my head on my drive to work, imagining asking her point blank, and then immediately picturing her dismissing me, laughing it off like she always did. The word overreacting had become her weapon, and every time she said it, I doubted myself a little more. But after that night at Malone's, things didn't just feel off, they were undeniably different. She was gone more often, and when she was home, it was like living with a stranger. She avoided eye contact, tapped her phone screen obsessively. Any once in a while, I'd catch her smiling at something she wasn't sharing with me. I'd lie awake next to her at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of her laughing across that tavern booth with him, her hand brushing against his like it was the most natural thing in the world. The Saturday before Thanksgiving finally boiled over. I came home early from a shift. The plant had cut hours that week. I found her in the kitchen, humming to herself while she chopped vegetables. For a moment, it felt almost normal, almost like the way things used to be. But then I noticed her phone on the counter, screen lit up, a message preview glowing. It wasn't from her mom. It wasn't from a friend. It was from someone saved in her phone as Jay. My heart thudded as I read the words on the screen. Can't stop thinking about last night. Same time tomorrow? I froze. It was like my body disconnected from my brain for a second. My hands numb, my vision tunneling. She turned around and saw me holding her phone. I'll never forget the look on her face. Not surprise, but irritation. Like I had interrupted something she didn't want to explain. We argued. My voice shook. Hers stayed sharp and defensive. I asked her who Jay was, why she was lying to me, what the hell was going on. She accused me of snooping, of invading her privacy, of making up stories in my head. And when I pushed harder, when I told her about seeing her at Malone's, she crossed her arms, let out this bitter little laugh, and said the words that would haunt me for weeks. You're overreacting. It's not what you think. not what I think. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. She just leaned on that same tired phrase, as if repeating it enough times would erase the truth I'd already seen with my own eyes. I wish I could say I walked out right then, that I had the strength to pack a bag and leave, but I didn't. I stayed. I stayed because 10 years of history doesn't just vanish in a single fight. I stayed because the thought of losing everything, our home, our life, our marriage, felt heavier than the truth pressing down on me. And maybe deep down I stayed because part of me still wanted to believe her. But the universe has a cruel way of exposing what we try so hard to hide. Thanksgiving rolled around. And like every year, we went to my parents' place. My mom cooked enough food for 20 people, even though there were only 8 of us around the table. My brother brought his kids. My dad carved the turkey, and for a few hours, I almost forgot. Sarah smiled, poured wine for my mom, laughed at my nephew's jokes. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect daughter-in-law. But I saw the way she slipped into the hallway every so often. Phone pressed to her ear, whispering. A week later, the dam burst. It was early December, and Hartwell was already dressed up for Christmas. Lights strung across Main Street, the town square filled with kids waiting for Santa. Carols spilling out of the church on Sunday mornings. It should have been cozy, heartwarming. Instead, it was the backdrop for the moment everything came crashing down. I was at the grocery store, Hartwell's only one. The kind where you run into half the town, whether you want to or not, picking up milk and bread after work. That's when I heard it. 2 women near the produce section whispering in that way that's meant to be overheard. One of them said, "Did you hear about Sarah Mitchell? Word is she's been seen with Jason Miller at Malone's every week." Jason Miller. That was the J. Jason had grown up in Hartwell, gone to high school a few years ahead of us. He'd been a bit of a scroop back then, dropped out, left town, and returned a few years ago to work construction. Everyone knew him as the guy who never quite got it together. But apparently, he'd gotten together with my wife. I stood there, frozen between the apples and the potatoes, listening as they went on about how shocking it was, how everyone knew except me. I wanted to scream, to tell them to shut the hell up, but I couldn't move. It felt like the walls of that store were closing in, the hum of the fluorescent lights growing louder until it was all I could hear. By the time I got home, my hands were trembling so bad I nearly dropped the groceries. Sarah was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. And when I confronted her, when I told her people were talking, that Jason's name was being thrown around, she didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she rolled her eyes, sighed like I was the problem, and said, "This town loves to gossip. You're letting them get in your head. You're overreacting. Overreacting." Again, even as the truth spread like wildfire, even as my world collapsed. She clung to that word like it could save her. But here's the thing about small towns. Once a rumor starts, it doesn't stop. And within days, it wasn't just whispers in the grocery store. It was stares at the gas station, pitying smiles at the diner, friends texting me late at night asking if I was okay. The whole damn town knew. Everyone but me. Or maybe I had known all along, and I just didn't want to admit it. The breaking point wasn't discovering her affair, it was realizing. I was the last to know. That my private humiliation had become public entertainment. That I couldn't walk down Main Street without feeling like a walking punchline. And as much as Sarah tried to gaslight me, tried to twist the story, there was no denying it anymore. Jason Miller wasn't just a name in her phone. He was the man who had set fire to my marriage. She had handed him the matches. That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. Fallout isn't just the pieces left behind after an explosion. It's the suffocating dust that lingers in the air, choking you long after the blast. That's what December of 2019 felt like for me. Every day was heavy, suffocating. It was filled with the residue of a life I thought I had, and the reality I couldn't escape. Once the affair became public knowledge, there was no hiding. In Hartwell, people don't just hear news. They devour it, chew on it, and spit it back out in the most dramatic ways. At first, it was whispers behind my back. Then it became sympathetic nods, the kind where someone tilts their head just slightly and gives you that pitying half smile. And then came the bold ones, the people who thought it was their duty to inform me. As if I hadn't already had my face rubbed in it 100 times, I'd be at the gas station pumping fuel into my old Ford, and someone would shuffle up beside me, muttering, "Sorry to hear about Sarah. Didn't think she had it in her," or at the diner. Old Mr. Cartwright, who had known me since I was a kid, would pat my shoulder and say, "You're better off, son." Always knew that girl had wandering eyes. Everyone suddenly became an expert on my marriage, dissecting it like a frog in a high school biology class. It wasn't just strangers either. My own family weighed in. My brother Tom Blanas ever told me I needed to man up and throw her out. My mom cried every time she called, asking how I was holding up, asking if I was eating, as if heartbreak could be solved with lasagna. My dad, stoic as he was, didn't say much. But the disappointment in his silence was enough. And through it all, Sarah acted like I was the one destroying things. She still insisted I was overreacting, that what she had with Jason wasn't what people thought, that it was just a friendship blown out of proportion. But the late-night absences, the texts, the way she practically recoiled when I tried to touch her, it all told the story she refused. To admit out loud, the nights were the worst. Lying in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, my chest tight with rage and grief, I'd hear her phone buzz on the nightstand, see her roll over to check it with her face turned away from me, and I'd feel that knot in my stomach tighten until I thought I'd break. Sometimes I wanted to scream, to grab the phone and throw it against the wall, to demand she stop lying. But I didn't. I just lay there, paralyzed by a cocktail of anger and shame. Work didn't help either. At the plant, news had spread just as quickly. Co-workers gave me space, which only made the silence worse. The machines clanked and groaned, but inside my head, there was only one noise, her laugh from that tavern, looping like a broken record. I'd go through the motions, punch, in, weld, lift. Punch out, but I was a ghost in my own life. Christmas that year was the most hollow holiday I've ever lived through. Usually. Sarah and I decorated the house together, arguing over whether to put the tree by the window or the fireplace, stringing lights while sipping hot cocoa. That December, she barely pretended. She hung a few ornaments, then retreated to the bookstore or claimed she was running errands. On Christmas Eve, while families in Hartwell gathered by their trees, I sat alone in the living room, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at the blinking lights like they were mocking me. Sarah didn't even come home until after midnight. I told myself I'd confront her again after the holidays, that I'd draw a line, that I wouldn't let myself be humiliated any longer. But when January rolled around, the reality of what this was doing to me hit harder than I ever expected. I stopped sleeping. My appetite vanished. The weight I'd carried so steadily at the plant, both literal and metaphorical, suddenly felt impossible. My body ached, my mind spun, and I started calling off shifts. One morning I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. Hollow eyes. Unshaven face. Shoulders slumped like the life had been drained out of me. Depression isn't something I'd ever claimed before. I always thought it was just sadness, something you could shake off if you tried hard enough. But that winter, I learned what it really was. It was waking up every morning with a pit in my stomach, wishing you could go back to sleep, just to escape your own thoughts. It was standing in the shower, water scalding hot, trying to wash away the ache inside your chest. It was hearing your wife laugh softly at her phone in the next room and realizing she hadn't laughed like that with you in months. By February, people stopped whispering. They just stared. Jason and Sarah weren't hiding anymore. They went to Malone's together, sat side by side at the bar, strolled down Main Street like they were some new couple in town. And everywhere I went, I saw them. Not just with my eyes, but in the way people looked at me, pity dripping off their faces. I had become that guy, the one whose wife left him for Jason Miller. One night in late February, after weeks of holding it in, I finally broke. Sarah came home late again, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and cheap beer. And when I asked her where she'd been, she gave me that same tired answer. "You're overreacting." Something snapped in me. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at her and said, "Then leave." And she did. She packed a bag in silence, threw some clothes into a duffel and walked out the door. No apology, no explanation, just the slam of the door echoing through the empty house. I sat there on the couch, staring at the spot where she'd been, and for the first time in months there was silence. No buzzing phone, no excuses, no tension in the air, just silence. And it was almost worse. The weeks that followed were a blur. Divorce papers came quickly. Sarah was efficient about it, almost like she'd been preparing. I signed them with a numb hand, my name scrawled across documents that severed a decade of my life. Friends tried to pull me out, tried to get me to come to the diner, to go watch the Steelers at the bar, but I couldn't. I didn't want to see the pity in their eyes. Didn't want to hear Jason's name in the air. I avoided Main Street altogether. I couldn't bear to pass the bookstore where Sarah had once smiled at me from behind the counter. I drove the long way around town just to avoid Malone's. Even the Walmart parking lot felt hostile. A place where whispers waited around every corner. I wish I could say I found strength right away, that I rose above it, but the truth is, I drowned for months. Drowned in whiskey, in loneliness, in the suffocating quiet of a house that no longer felt like home. Some nights I'd scroll through old photos, our wedding, our trips to Pittsburgh, the housewarming party in 2016, and I'd wonder how it all slipped away. How the woman who once held my hand through everything became the stranger who walked out on me for Jason Miller. But it's the funny thing about rock bottom is, once you're there, the only place left to go is up. And by the spring of 2020, something inside me began to shift. Spring 2020 was strange in every sense of the word. The world was turning upside down with news of a virus spreading overseas. Whispers of lockdowns and shutdowns starting to dominate every headline. But for me, life had already been in lockdown for months. My world had collapsed long before the pandemic rolled into Pennsylvania. Sarah had moved in with Jason by then. Word around Hartwell was they were renting a small place on Maple Drive, not far from the high school. People told me without me even asking as if I needed updates on the woman who had dismantled my life. At first, those updates made me sick, like someone twisting a knife in a wound that hadn't even begun to close. But eventually I realized something. If they were so quick to give me information, then maybe I could turn that same small-town grapevine into something else. I'd spent months drowning, letting grief hollow me out. But anger has a way of pulling you back to the surface. And by March, the anger had burned away the shame. I was tired of being the punchline, tired of the whispers and the pity, tired of Sarah looking me in the eye and telling me I was overreacting while half the damn town knew better. So I decided I wouldn't. Just survive this side take. Control of it. The first step was reclaiming myself. I stopped drinking every night. I forced myself to get back to the gym, even if it meant just lifting the lightest weights and sweating out the poison in my system. I started cooking again, meals that weren't just frozen dinners or takeout. It was small, but it gave me back a sense of control. And control was something I hadn't felt in a long time. But healing wasn't enough. Not for me. Not after everything she'd done, and certainly not after the way she'd made me doubt my own sanity. No, I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the humiliation she'd poured onto me. I didn't have to look far to find cracks in her new life. Jason Miller wasn't exactly known for being reliable. He bounced from job to job, always one paycheck away from losing it all. And Sarah, for all her ambition, had tied herself to someone who couldn't even hold down steady work at the construction site. Word spread quickly that Jason had been caught drinking on the job, that he'd skipped shifts, that the boss was ready to can him. One night in April, I ran into Jason's foreman at the gas station, a couple of beers in his cart, a tired look on his face. He mentioned Jason had been slacking, that it was only a matter of time before he got the boot. I didn't say much in response, but inside, spark lit up. The next week, I made an anonymous call to the construction company's office. I told them Jason had been spotted drinking at Malone's during his lunch breaks, that I'd seen him stumbling back to work, reeking of beer. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. Jason practically lived at that tavern. But giving them that nudge was all it took. Within days, Jason was out of a job. I didn't stop there. Sarah was still helping her mom run the bookstore. The business had been slow for years. With the pandemic looming, I knew it would only get worse. So I started leaving anonymous reviews online, talking about unprofessional management and inappropriate behavior from the staff. It spread whispers through town that Sarah was distracted, that she couldn't keep the books straight. People already loved gossip. Didn't take much to push them further. Soon enough, customers began to dwindle. The bookstore closed early more often. I'd drive by and see Sarah inside, pacing between shelves that used to be crowded but now sat empty. I told myself it was just karma. Still, revenge is a tricky thing. There were nights I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself if I'd gone too far. Was I becoming the same kind of liar she had been, just in a different way? Was I poisoning myself more than I was hurting her? But every time I thought about letting it go, I remembered her laugh at Malone's, her dismissive smirk, that word overreacting, in Wyatt, and the hesitation would vanish. By summer, the tables had turned. Jason was unemployed. Sarah was scrambling to keep the bookstore alive, and their new life was crumbling under the same weight she had dumped on me. Meanwhile, I was finally starting to climb out of the pit. I started jogging in the mornings, headphones blasting Springsteen or Pearl Jam as the sun came up. I picked up extra shifts at the plant, proving to myself that I wasn't broken, that I could still work, still stand tall. I even reconnected with old friends I'd pushed away, grabbing beers in backyards since bars were shutting down. For the first time in a long time, felt like I had power again, and then came the moment I didn't see coming. One humid evening in July, I was sitting on the porch, sipping iced tea, when a car pulled up. Sarah stepped out. She looked thinner, worn down, her hair tied back in a messy bun. Not the polished, ambitious woman I'd married. She asked if we could talk. My chest tightened, but I didn't invite her in. We sat on the porch steps, 6 feet apart like the world demanded back then. She told me things weren't working with Jason, that he wasn't who she thought he was, that she'd made mistakes. She even cried, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand, saying she missed the stability we had. For a split second, I felt the pull, the history, the love we once shared, the echo of all those years. But then I remembered. The lies, the humiliation, the way she made me feel like I was losing my mind while she carried on with Jason in front of the whole town. And the pitying eyes of every neighbor and stranger who knew my business before I did. I told her it was too late. My voice was calm, steady, almost cold. I said I hoped she found whatever it was she was looking for, but it wasn't here anymore. She nodded, tears streaking her face, and left without another word. I watched her taillights disappear down Birch Lane, and for the first time since everything fell apart, I felt lighter. That summer was when I realized revenge hadn't just been about hurting her, it had been about reclaiming myself, about proving that I wasn't powerless, that I wasn't the fool she made me out to be. And while I still wrestled with the morality of what I'd done, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching her world collapse while I slowly built mine. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, even when you think you're in control. And by the time fall arrived, I had to face the question I'd been avoiding all along. Was revenge enough? Or did I need something more to truly move on? Fall 2020 arrived in Hartwell with a crisp chill that made the town feel like it had finally exhaled after months of chaos. Leaves crunched underfoot. The smell of burning wood from fireplaces drifted down Birch Lane. And for the first time in nearly a year, I felt like I could breathe. But this wasn't just about seasons changing. It was about the slow, almost imperceptible shift inside me. The part that had been hollowed out by betrayal and rebuilt by sheer force of will. Sarah and Jason's relationship had collapsed quietly over the summer. Hartwell being Hartwell. I heard about it the way I'd heard everything else. Whispers at the diner. Messages from mutual acquaintances, half-truths, and exaggerated stories. Jason had moved back in with his parents, jobless and angry. Sarah, humbler now, was trying to patch together the bookstore with her mom, but it was struggling more than ever. I won't lie, I felt a sting of satisfaction, the echo of revenge, but it was muted now. The anger that had driven me for months was finally giving way to something else. Clarity. I started thinking about myself, not about her. Not about Jason, not about the whispers of the town. but about who I was and who I wanted to become. I realized revenge had been a crutch. It had given me focus when I felt lost, but it wasn't the end of the story. The real work was in healing, in reclaiming my dignity and building a life I could be proud of without needing anyone else to stumble along the way. By October, I had transformed more than I could have imagined in January. I'd upgraded my apartment, a modest place, but mine entirely invested in some online courses to expand my skills at work, and started running every morning. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was doing it for me. The knots of anxiety and humiliation that had consumed me were loosening, replaced with a sense of control I hadn't felt since before the affair. One afternoon, while walking through Hartwell's town square, I ran into my neighbor, Mrs. Patel, a spry woman in her 70s who always had a kind word. She smiled at me warmly and said, "You look happy, really, truly happy," and it hit me like a jolt. That was the first time someone had seen Manat, the husk of a man destroyed by betrayal. Not the victim of a scandal, but the man I'd fought to become. I didn't see Sarah again after that fall afternoon. I didn't need to. The chapter she belonged in was closed, and the memories that once made me ache now felt like faded photographs in a drawer. I thought about forgiveness not in the sense of absolving her, not in the sense of erasing what happened, but in letting go of the poison I'd carried for months. The town would still talk. Some would whisper, some would judge, but their opinions no longer mattered. I'd reclaimed my life. Winter rolled in again, and Hartwell glowed with holiday lights. The smell of pine and cinnamon drifted from the town square. I decorated my apartment for the first time, not with grand gestures or perfection, but with intention. I wanted warmth, a sense of home that belonged entirely to me. That night, I sat by the window, sipping coffee and watching snowflakes settle on the streets below, thinking about how far I'd come. I realized I hadn't just survived the affair. The betrayal and the town's gossip eye had grown through it. I was stronger, wiser, and more attuned to who I truly was. I'd lost a marriage, yes, but I'd gained clarity. I'd learned that love can be cruel, that people can be selfish, and that small towns have eyes everywhere. But I'd also learned something more valuable: resilience. Power isn't about getting revenge or making others suffer. It's about standing up after life knocks you down, taking ownership of your story, and moving forward on your own terms. By the new year, I had a routine. Work, runs, classes, friends. I laughed again without guilt. I smiled without hesitation. And I even dared to dream about love again one day, maybe, with someone who would never make me feel invisible or humiliated. But for now, I was content with the life I was building on my own. One day at a time. Sometimes I still think about Sarah. I don't crave closure anymore. I don't need it. She made her choices, I made mine, and the town, well, it kept talking, just as it always would. But when I walk down Main Street now, I hold my head high. I am no longer the man who sat in his car outside Malone's, frozen and betrayed. I am no longer the man whose life was dictated by gossip and humiliation. I am Daniel Moore, survivor, an architect of my own destiny. And in a strange way, I even feel grateful. Grateful for the pain, for the betrayal, for the humiliation. Because it forced me to confront my own weakness, to fight for myself, and to discover that life, even after the most devastating heartbreak, can be rebuilt. Stronger, better, and entirely on my terms.